It's November 7, 2021, Sunday afternoon, about 1:30. I'm Todd Dunn, and today I'm in Acadia National Park, and I intend to walk at least half of the Ship Harbor Nature Trail. The trail itself is a figure 8, and it consists of 2 loops, and you can walk either way on either loop, and you can walk one loop or both loops. So lots of options as to how you walk this trail. The first loop is relatively flat and well graded, very easy walking, and I'd say it's actually wheelchair accessible. Now the second loop is not so much that way. It's the loop that goes all the way out to the ocean, and it gets a little bit rocky, and there are bits of boardwalk you have to walk on, and the trail is certainly much less easy walking than the first loop. So we'll walk at least the first loop today. It depends on how crowded it is. There are currently 9 cars here at the parking area. So let's get going and walk the Ship Harbor Nature Trail. Okay, right back there is the beginning of the trail. I'm about 100 feet down the trail, and a little bit of an open area here, and then we're going to go into a somewhat brushy area with all deciduous trees for a little bit until we get to the beginning of the first loop of the trail. Here is a map of the area. The trail is right here, and we're just about there, and we're gonna walk down and do the first loop, and depending on how crowded it is, maybe do the second loop as well. Okay, here's the beginning of the first loop. If you go left, the path goes through the forest and away from the water, and if you go right, the path goes along the water. Now I can hear some people coming, so I'll go along the water. So we're going to go counterclockwise on this half of the first loop. But this particular path is quite pleasant. You're in the forest, but you're only 100 feet at the most from Ship Harbor itself. And as you can see, it's a nice easy trail. Some small grades, but nothing steep. And this is usually a nice trail to walk pretty much all year, at least the first loop. Even when it's snowy, it's not too bad. Okay, I've come off the trail by 30 feet or so up onto these rocks, because this is a nice viewpoint to look at Ship Harbor. Very pretty little harbor. And that is the Atlantic Ocean out there. Everything is pretty flat today. And very quiet and peaceful. Incidentally, here on November 7th, it is almost 55 degrees today here on the southern tip of Mount Desert Island. I wore a jacket, but I'm beginning to regret it. It's a little too warm for it. And another view out the mouth of Ship Harbor into the Atlantic Ocean. And the path through the woods. And the path is going to veer off to the left a little bit because there's a little cove here. And at the end of that cove is where this path joins the other side of the first loop here on the Ship Harbor Nature Trail. Okay, here's that little cove I was talking about. And right now at high tide, there's plenty of water in here, but at low tide, this dries out almost completely. Remember, we have a 10 to 15 foot tidal range here on the coast of Maine. And the trail is going to head a little bit more into the woods here. All right, this is the head of that little cove. And we'll walk into the woods just a little bit until we get to the junction between the first loop and the second loop of this figure 8 trail. And that junction is right here. If we turn all the way left, this is the through the woods part of the first loop that goes back to the parking area. And if we look the other way, looking south now, here is the inland part of the second loop. This climbs up a little on these sort of log steps. And then there are several narrow boardwalks that traverse nominally swampy areas before you get out to the rocky coast. And over here we have the other side of the second loop, which I think I'll take. That goes along the harbor out to the coast. And this is the little bit more rugged part of the trail here. It doesn't start out that way, although there are some little steps in the trail, but it does get quite a bit narrower, and we will hit some bits of boardwalk. We're about 100 yards down the right hand or east or westerly side of the second loop, doing it counterclockwise as well. And you can see the trail's a bit narrower and rockier, and here is a side path you can go down to get out onto that little rock bar that extends out into Ship Harbor proper. All right, we're 100 feet past that side trail, and you can see that we're paralleling the entrance to the harbor. It's right down there. It looks nice and wide and deep, but I assure you it isn't. Get a much better view right up here. Now this path, as you can see, is a lot rockier and more uneven, so you do have to watch your footing a little bit. But it's not bad. As we come down to a nice view out the mouth of Ship Harbor and into the Atlantic Ocean, with Gotts Island and Little Gott Island in the distance. And here is the entrance. Unfortunately, to view it is right into the sun. I'll look that way, and I can assure you that at low tide you can walk across there without getting your feet wet. Now it might be a little harder. But there's the entrance. A beautiful, beautiful fall day here on the south coast of Mount Deserted Island. And the path, as you can see, continues to get a little rockier, lots of roots, and you do need to pay attention to your footing. As we get closer to the entrance to the harbor, we start encountering these little boardwalks over spots that would be wet in the spring after snowmelt and after a rainy day. But right now you can see it's very dry. And right there is the harbor. And as I mentioned, compared to the first loop, this loop is rough and rocky, although by a lot of standards it's not bad at all. So we'll continue and take a look at the entrance to the harbor from out on the rocks. There's the trail back there and a little bit of the entrance gorge. And here is the entrance proper. And we can walk right out onto the rocks to take a look at things. So this is the entrance to Ship Harbor. This looks nice and wide, and I wouldn't have any trouble taking Tortuga in there now, but I wouldn't want to stay long because once the tide starts going out, it's going to get shallow fast. We're looking kind of southwest there between Gotts Island and Placentia Island. And you can see a bit of Swans Island in the distance. And if we look the other way, this is southeast. See out into the Atlantic. And there's a nice view of the two Duck Islands. Little Duck Island on the left and Big Duck Island on the right. And if we had a nice zoomed in shot, we might even be able to see the Big Duck Island lighthouse at the extreme right-hand end of Big Duck Island. You can see this is typical rocky Maine coast, and the trail goes right along the top of the rocks. That's where we came out of the woods, and looking back through the entrance to Ship Harbor proper. So I'm just going to continue along the trail until it turns and goes back into the woods to go back to the intersection point between the two loops via a more inland route. And that we'll get there in just less than 100 yards. I just thought I'd stop for a second and show you this little beach here, which by the standards of the southern part of Mount Desert Island counts as a sandy beach. I mean, the rocks are less than a foot in diameter, so that's sand, isn't it? Well, after about 100 yards walking along the top of the rocks, the trail turns back into the woods on more Boardwalk. And here is another view of the rocky coast of the southern tip of Mount Desert Island and some of the islands south of MDI, Gotts Island, Placentia, Swans, etc. And there's where the trail runs right along the top of the rocks until it turns and follows the eastern side of Ship Harbor inland. And here we'll walk these boardwalks, and there are 3 or 4 of them. They're not very long, but we'll just walk these as we head back into the woods and go inland a bit from Ship Harbor back to the junction between the two trail loops. Now we're about 100 yards inland now. As you can see, the forest is not particularly verdant. The reason for that is there's not a lot of soil here. As you can see, lots of rock, and even where there is soil, it's usually no more than a foot or so before you get to bedrock. Now this area was private property until the late 30s when it was acquired and transferred to Acadia National Park by George Dorr and John D. Rockefeller Jr. in around 1938. And that's when this trail was initially developed as an Acadia National Park Nature Trail. So it's still very scenic here, just quite different than the side of this loop that runs along the edge of Ship Harbor proper. We're about 150 yards east of the harbor here. And we come up on another boardwalk. Now this side of the second loop, the eastern side, is a lot easier going than the western side. So we'll just continue through the woods here, kind of a pastoral and quiet walk. Now as we move inland away from the ocean, the trees are getting bigger. That's a function of there maybe being a little bit more soil here, and also we don't have to deal with quite as harsh a winter climate with more or less continuous winds off of the ocean, which allows the trees to grow up a little bit and achieve a little bit more height. Now bear in mind that 80 years ago this area had just come into Acadia National Park and was, at that time, this was a series of small farms, and a lot of this area had been logged off because the local people used the wood for building their homes and, more importantly, for heating their homes. So one of the reasons that none of the trees here are very big is that probably the vast majority of these trees have grown up here since 1938, when the area became part of Acadia National Park. Okay, this is the beginning of the descent down to the intersection between the two loops in this trail. It's not steep, and as you can see, the park has built sort of log steps into the trail. That is, I think, not to make it easier going, but to limit erosion. Well, here we are back down to the intersection between the two loops, and straight ahead is the first bit we walked along the shore of Ship Harbor, and we're going to take the inland part of the first loop now, so we will have walked the entire figure 8. Now this little bit of trail here back to the parking lot is the most forested part of the Ship Harbor Nature Trail, and you get a much better feel that you're walking through the woods here because the trees are bigger, and in a lot of places they overgrow the trail, and you really have a feel that you're walking through the woods. And again, this is a very wide and smooth trail, very few tripping hazards for this part of the trail. So if you want just an easy walk with views of Ship Harbor, you can just do the first loop here in the nature trail. It'll take you about 20 minutes, and if you're up to a little bit more challenging walk, you can do the second loop, and that'll take you another 20 minutes or so. Okay, here we are, very much in the woods now. As you can see, trees are bigger, and you get much more of a being in the forest feel than we did on any other part of this trail. Okay, I like the Ship Harbor Nature Trail for a number of reasons. One, it's the closest Acadia National Park trail to my house, which makes it easy to come over here for an afternoon walk. But more importantly, although this isn't a very long trail, it gives you quite a variety of terrains to walk through. Here we are walking through the woods. Pan around. Really feel that you're in the woods here and not at the ocean beach. And it's a short trail, but you have wooded path like this. You have a rocky seaside path, a path right along the rocky coast of Maine, and a forested path along the tranquil waters of Ship Harbor itself. And I hope this little bit of trail here really brings out the contrast between this segment of the trail, the western segment of the first loop along the shore of Ship Harbor, and the inland segment of the second loop, and the coastal segment of the second loop. 4 completely different settings. And we're just about back to the beginning of the first loop. And one thing about this trail is you can walk the trail, even though it's an out and back trail, without doubling back on where you went, and you're going to have something new to see pretty much the full length of the hike, with the exception of the first 150 yards or so between the parking lot and the beginning of the first loop, which is where we are right now. This is the beginning of the first loop, and this is the path back to the parking lot. So you saw that on the way out. So I think I'll take this opportunity to end the video. I hope you enjoyed walking the Ship Harbor Trail with me today. It's one of my favorite trails here on this part of Mount Desert Island, and particularly in the fall when there aren't so many people, although I can hear some people now. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel, because I'm going to be going into Acadia National Park quite a bit over the next few months, since there'll be fewer and fewer tourists as we get into winter. Thanks again for watching.